Hi everyone, delighted to be here on the holding cell. Thanks to Simon and Ross Lewis for setting up this. It's a great opportunity for us to, as writers and readers, to be together and to get together, and lovers of literature as well. Just in these difficult times, it is a peculiar time for people at the moment. I know. The first two are from my third one is a new poem, a relatively new poem. The first two poems are kind of companion pieces. So they're written, I suppose, that these are the first poem I'm going to read is called Leave Taking. And I wrote it for my brother Eddie about my dad. And my dad died back in the late 80s while I was away living in London. And I was with Eddie up at in Monaghan in Inniskeen at the Patrick Kavanagh Festival. It must have been 2013 or 2014 when we were there. And he told me the story of taking my dad back to his stomping ground, which was around that area. He was station master in Inniskeen for some time in his early part of his career. And Eddie told me the stories anyway of when I was away of taking our dad back to these places, and that became the poem that is Leave Taking, which I'll read now. If you like, it's kind of I'm using Eddie's memory, but I'm also making out of the poem my own leave taking from my dad as well, which I didn't have at the time because by the time I got home from London, he'd already passed away, unfortunately. So this is leave taking for Eddie. The 5 years before he died, you took him back each spring to where he started out. Small towns on the loud Monaghan border that burned on the tongue with bucolic satisfaction. Knockbridge, Inniskeen, Rosslock, places I only knew in imagination. Each year you drove him down the high-hedged roads, slowing only to look into derelict yards or fields where people he once knew had worked and lived. One year, before you turned for home, you stopped in Art McCooey's bar, where in the grip of whiskey there were words, and you were privy to another side of Pa, a man not known for talk. You had to drag him out after a while and put him in the car. He had grown fierce, rubbed up against a face from the dim past, an incident arising at a dance in the dawn of time. The hurt still raw, the anger in his eyes. You knew you couldn't ask, so drove the whole way home in silence. Then, that last year, it was as if he knew. He made you stop at every neighbour's house, although you'd passed them all for 4 years in a row. You let him go, waited in the car and read a book, while he was fated by farmers and their wives, like one who'd been away at war for years, wondering what his business could be now, beyond the final saying of goodbyes. When he emerged, you saw a kind of light in him, but didn't mention it. On the way back, in McCooey's, whiskey in hand, you held a sputtering match to his cigar. The second poem, as I said, is a companion piece in a way. It's called Somewhere Between, and it's kind of it comes straight after Leave Taking in the collection as well. Not because there's any real connection in time or anything. It's actually a memory of my own childhood, or a reimagined memory of my own childhood, where we were farmed out, if you like, during the summers up to my aunt, who was my dad's twin sister. Again, up around Rosslock, up around the Louth Monaghan border. Uh, and my older brothers would go, and my older sisters would go, and they would get jobs to do on the farm. But because I was the youngest, I really felt kind of left out of things, and I didn't really have a place to be as such. So the poem is about that. I suppose in a way it's a comedy poem, um, but it's a kind of comedy that you don't see at the time. You only see when you're looking back at it. So this is somewhere in between. My brothers were out in the fields, my sisters in the kitchen with our aunt, while I was somewhere in between, hunting for eggs buried in warm hay in and around the outlying sheds. I wasn't strong enough to lift bales, couldn't be trusted with a pitchfork. Even my soft hands were lethal, dropping near hatched eggs and flags. I carried awkward buckets from the pump across the yard, socks squelching in wellies when I reached the kitchen door. I envied the older boys who rode the old Dexter up and down drills with steady hands. One day they let me have a go. I crushed plants in their prime, red-faced, couldn't steer, couldn't hear my uncle's roars of "knock her off." Mind wandered to a distant bird that could have been a cuckoo. From then on, I was useless, fit company only for poor blind Pete, who sat at the back door, stirring only when rain began to fall, growling when stray hens encroached. At dinner time, in the noisy heat, amid the sweat of hunger-driven men, the food grew in my mouth as I chewed, and when I took a drink to force it down, I gagged, the creamy yellow warmth, too much like nature, too unlike me. I wanted only to be older then, but by the time I got there, everything had changed. So it's a kind of a comedy, I suppose, but it wasn't seen that way by myself. The third poem and final poem I'm going to read is, I suppose, an attempt to kind of link the digital age that we live in now with kind of the legacy of my own parents. A lot of the poems in a lot of the poems that I write, I suppose, are poems about family or poems about memory or reimagined memory or relationships or things like that. They're very grounded in real experience. But this is an attempt, I suppose, to try to link or to use modern technology as a way of finding the way back to people, which you can't do, I think, anyway. And so I suppose the poem, in a way, is the way to do this. The poem is called Googling My Parents. I suppose the poem is the hopefully successful outcome at Googling my parents. It achieves what the actual Google tool can't do. It allows some sort of synthesis between memory and imagination to create poetry and to create the remembrance of the people or the loved ones in a real and tangible way for the person themselves and hopefully for a listenership or a readership too. So this is the poem, final poem I'm going to read this evening. Thanks a lot for listening. It's a great opportunity, and I'm definitely going to do it again. Or hopefully, um, I might do a short story or talk a little bit about short stories the next time I'm on. So thanks very much, all of you who listened in. Googling my parents. When I googled my parents, there were no matching results. Only traces of others who bore the same names, living counterfeit lives that failed to reflect the authenticity of monochrome days I recall in that house by the railway line, where the sun shone all summer, where huge ash trees waved their hysterical arms in March winds, and a thin frost painted a dull world silver on the shortest days. My parents don't exist in the world, real or virtual, but are trapped in stacks of wrinkled snaps. They look out at me with unseeing eyes, perplexed, uncertain, frozen in a moment snatched from time. I know there's no option to reboot, no going back except through memory's patched up matinee. From time to kickstart reminiscence, I read their names on stone, amongst a host of other names on stones, ranged on a blanket of land that rolls down to the sea near home. Perhaps the mind is a hard drive, scanning the residue of lives no longer with us. Its circuits switching on and off, firing in dreams, where the dead arise, their voices talking out of the bright cloud. Thanks a lot for listening, everyone, and hope to see you again soon. Mind yourselves and take care.